Good morning, everyone. What an honor. Thank you very much, the IEDC, to invite me here. It's such an honor. What I would like to do is describe to you a journey that's happened with the AI lab that I've directed at INSEAD. There's 18 engineers who work with me, plus there are a couple of editors and linguists and a network of curators and freelance people that work with me. There's in addition to that, there's Dr. Alex Koenig. You can raise your hand, Alex, who I've invited to come here to help with technology transfer and the like. What I'd like to do is kind of start with the history of this generative AI area, going back to some of the origins of it, and kind of demystify a little bit here. How many of you ever went to a spreadsheet? You had a list of data there, and you sorted it from high to low, and then said, you know, big accounts, middle, small accounts. Anyone done that sort of spreadsheet? Okay, update your resume. That's called unsupervised machine learning, okay? The big innovation in my generation was the electronic pocket calculator that was invented at Caltech in 1967. We're the only species that people know of, at least, that do square roots. The square root of 81 is 9. We have an algorithm in our heads that we've learned, and the pocket calculator would do square roots instantly. What you type in is 4 plus 4. That's called the prompt, and then it generates the answer, 8. That's called generative AI. When people look at a concept like a pocket calculator, they don't say artificial intelligence. Back then, they did. This is called the AI effect. The AI effect is anything you see today, 20 years from now, they'll just say, it's just a piece of software. So AI is a moving window. And I'd like to focus on the part that's generative in nature. And I'm going to give credit to a professor at MIT named John D.C. Little, who noticed that optical scanner data was accumulating so quickly, so much data. Remember, this is the late 70s, early 80s, where optical store scanner data was being generated, the UPC, barcodes. So much data was being generated that there weren't enough statisticians in the world that could analyze that data. So John Little came up with the idea, why not write an algorithm that mimics a statistician? It's not putting statisticians out of business, there simply aren't enough of them. And he had the artificial statistician analyze the data in real time, and then it would write a memo. It would write a memo to who? To a recipient, like a marketing manager. And it would say something like, Procter & Gamble is having a promotion in Cleveland, Ohio, and you, as a Unilever marketing manager, you can respond to that in 3 ways. And it would give a recommendation. Number 1, look at the experiment and learn from it. Number 2, exploit the experiment, tweak your products so that they will misinterpret the data. Or number 3, they've led themselves open to you getting more sales. Choose A, B, or C. That was the first application of generative AI in business, and it was the year 1990. I happen to be the grandson academically of the great John D.C. Little. His student was my professor back then. So my generation, I was working on scanner data, telecommunications data, that kind of data to see what kind of insights and information could be generated out of these data sets. Your generation, for the young people here, will call that big data. My generation called it data. Nothing really has changed fundamentally. What's happened is it's become much more popularized. And in every period in history, there's a popularization of a form of artificial intelligence. And we're going through, let's call it the generative phase, where people are now publicly witnessing things that have been around for a while, but now they're more accessible to people. So what I'd like to describe is the journey I've had, where we're going, and then get to the theme of how can a country, a people, a culture leapfrog into this area at the lowest possible cost and the lowest CO2 emissions, theoretically possible. Because as you know, if you ask someone to train a large language model like ChatGPT with minimally 4,000 graphics cards humming, that's like all of the electrical grid of some countries. It's not possible to do it. But are there ways to do it in an alternative fashion is the question. So that's what we're going to talk about. My journey started with cell site optimization modeling, where to put cell towers in a city. We would take months and months to do these studies that would be used by the telecommunications industry. I was an economist working in Washington, D.C. at the time. And I thought to myself, boy, people are interested in cellular telephones, but they're also interested in other things. And in particular, I was doing projects in Haiti, in Brazil, in Africa, and elsewhere. And foreign direct investment is often conditioned on someone doing a due diligence, like an investment bank. If you can't calculate the export potential of a product, no one will invest in that country. So in Haiti, a factory might be making shower curtain rings. They might be making 6-inch nails. If there's no market research studies on those products, no one's going to invest. So in the 1990s, I came up with an idea of algorithmically creating high-end industry studies. Things like if you paid McKinsey & Company or another consulting firm to produce an industry study, they'd take 6 months and it would be about $300,000, right, to do such a study. Is it possible to have an algorithm mimic McKinsey & Company and create hundreds of thousands of different industry studies? We started investing in that idea with our lab. In the year 2000, we turned the switch and we produced about 57,000 high-end industry studies, distributed through platforms. Today's platforms, Standard & Poor's, Capital IQ, platforms like that, have been distributing these research reports that are fully algorithmically created. There are no employees, it's a box in a closet. And they've been distributed now for about 20 years. With the profits from that initiative, we noticed something in our lab. It turns out that if you go to an American bookstore, and many of you have done that, you'll notice a massive self-help section. It's huge. It's as if Americans don't know what to do, right? And then if you go to a French bookstore in France, it's very small, not many books. So the French are centered and the Americans are flipped out, right? The truth is there's just less people who speak French. So the value chain of the French language for publishing isn't that good. You go to Italian, it's worse. Arabic, really bad. You go to African languages, and there's literally nothing published in them, things that we take for granted. So we created a money pump. With the money generated from selling industry studies to the World Bank and the IMF and Goldman Sachs, we took that money and we created language learning books, crossword puzzle books, dictionaries, games, things like that for the underserved languages of the world, about 300 languages. We were doing these and distributed with Rotary International, Adopt a Village programs, and many other different people there. To make sure that the technology was widely available, I decided to create a defensive patent. I filed it in the year 2000. And it was finally approved by the US Patent Office in the year 2007. No one wanted to approve this darn thing because it was the use of algorithms to generate original content. And it covered everything: music, radio, television, books, newspapers, everything. And the idea, this is called a defensive patent. You do the patent, and then you let anyone use it for free. So we let the patent go out, but no one could then stop someone else from doing it. The patent office didn't believe it was possible. They invited me to demonstrate to it. So I went to the patent office in DC. They asked me to say, write a research report on patent examiners. And I typed in a couple words, hit a button. There was a 250-page report on patent examination. And they gave me the patent the next day. From that moment, INSEAD did a press release. It showed up in the New York Times, and I was bombarded with requests. This was the year 2007, 2008. And you might remember Ask Jeeves or Ask.com or companies like that at that era. And I got one call that it was very important for our lab's work. We had a matrix, typical business school stuff, right? What's feasible, hard versus easy, and what can have impact, social impact, et cetera. And a lot of things are feasible with AI, many things. But you have to choose what you're going to work on. And the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation came to us and said, the world's poorest people are in which value chain? Agriculture. Not a lot of content in agriculture, especially in local languages. So we decided to kind of bridge that content divide. You might have read about in The Guardian or other kind of outlets that Africans are now using smartphones to get crop tips and weather reports in their local languages. So that was a platform we developed at INSEAD about 12 years ago. and it's used in about 90 countries. We don't brand it our name. It's actually used by organizations who then rebrand it under their organization's umbrella. So you might have heard of the Grameen Foundation. Other people like the European Union has been very generous in giving us money to then distribute it in various localities around the world. And that concept was quite useful, quite impactful on people's lives, very, very useful thing. But it's not very satisfactory. And the reason is many people in agriculture, the world's poorest people, want to get out of agriculture. What they're interested in is other things. Maybe they're interested in bicycle repair. Maybe they're interested in microfinance or financial inclusion. Who knows what they might be interested in? So I made a proposal to the foundation. Hey, why don't we do every known product, every known concept? If we're going to use AI, you might as well cover everything, every possible subject in every possible language. And they kind of gave me some feedback, saying, very interesting, Phil, but you know, we are really interested in healthcare, in polio, and in malaria. We're really interested in agriculture. This is beyond scope. But they were generous enough to give us a big grant to give it a try off of their general budget, right? And they said, Phil, whatever you do, don't ever come back. Because when you say you want to do everything, asking every 3 years for another $2 million, you know. So they use this word, make sure it's sustainable. Make sure it's sustainable. And what they meant by sustainable was actually double-edged sword. They actually meant profitable. But to make it profitable, you have to have a lower marginal cost and a lower fixed cost, which meant what? Burn the least amount of electricity possible. Because whenever you talk about AI, there is a cost. And it's not, as you mentioned, it's not trivial. So we have this interesting dilemma. How do you solve the problem of the lack of content in this world, and at the same time make sure that any country or culture can adopt it at the lowest possible cost? So 5.5 years ago, we set out on a journey to try to solve that problem. You're the first audience, public, that's going to see what we've come up with. What I'm going to show you will be available in the year 2024 in various forms and various places. And so it's a big honor for me to show you some of this stuff. What I'm going to do is give you a starting point of what the problem is. And you will have noticed that there's a very fancy graph, pieces of paper there, that was given to you. I'm not going to talk about that until after the question and answer. Some of the guests here need to leave us at about 11 o'clock for some urgencies. So I'm going to go to 11 o'clock, and then what's going to happen is, okay, maybe not. But if someone says, hey, where do you get the data from? And hey, what algorithm do you use? I'm going to talk about that fancy flow chart that was handed out. There's no need to be coy about this. I'll be totally overt to what we do. You know, that we're an open book. We're an open book. All right. So I'm going to skip over to some boring transparencies here. Let me turn this thing on. A little optical mouse here. Let's see if I can get it going. All right. Here we go. Let me just show you here. A little story here. People talk about generative AI in very broad terms because they're used to ChatGPT. But it's been around a long time, this concept. And there's two types, just broadly speaking. Sorry to be a professor here at this point. One is called data reduction. You have massive amounts of data and you reduce it down to a little blurb. Gives you an answer. That's reduction. There is an alternative that's also important. It's called expansion. This is a line in a database. Imagine the archives of a country that has massive amounts of cultural heritage, huge amounts, and it's hidden in a database that looks like that. What would an expert do if they saw that line and had to communicate it to someone else, as if it was a calculator? Tell me about that line of data. That's called data expansion. This is the answer to that line. That's what this line means, and it's more human readable. You can understand what this is. There's a massive amount of locked up knowledge, inherent insight, that's locked up in databases that are in really ugly formats. So there's two types, data reduction, data expansion. These two types of AI our lab has been working on for many different things, and I'm going to give you a few demonstrations of those technologies, so you get to see a flavor for what that is. We've done high-end industry studies, math books, spelling books, mobile apps, video games, encyclopedic works, poetry, all of these kinds of things we've been doing for about 25 years now. One of the questions we're asking is, can generative AI generate an entire industry? A company like Google might have 10,000 engineers working on search. What are they doing, these engineers? They're typing code. Well, code is text. Can I have an engine that writes an engine so I don't need 10,000 engineers to create a search engine, for example? Is that possible? So 5.5 years ago, we started thinking about it. Is that even feasible to actually do that? So people can get into an area or an industry if the entire industry has been pre-programmed. So that way, the requirement for HR, for human resources, go down, because often there's a shortage of human resources. And can we do it so that there's actually no use of massive amounts of energy at the same time? Basically, is it possible for a country or an organization or a culture to launch into big tech for the price of opening up a McDonald's restaurant, as opposed to having massive billions of dollars of funding going in? So that was the fundamental question. Here is the dilemma I like to present it as. This is Wikipedia. I love Wikipedia. We all love Wikipedia as a source, but there is something strange about it, and it's this power curve. Very few languages have a lot of articles. This is this language gap problem. English has 6.5 million articles, and imagine you're someone who speaks Kikuyu in Kenya, and you type in lump in breast in Kikuyu. What will you find on the internet? Nothing. There are no results found. No one's written anything on it. So you go to the national language. In Kenya, that's Swahili. Lump in breast. And what do you discover? No results found. Why? Because Swahili is missing 99.4% of the content that happens to be available in English as a language. And often people don't know how to type the words in English because their primary language gives them the direction of what they're searching for. Right? So even then, you're missing even more information. We call this a content divide or a content gap. Why is that? Why do we have this power curve? Because human beings are writing Wikipedia articles. It's costly. People are busy. They don't have time to do this. And if we wait, how long will it take to actually achieve such a thing? So basically, the concept we wanted to do was eliminate this gap. But in addition to that, within the English language, over 90% of the articles in English, as an example, are actually just one line. There actually isn't much content. Why? Because it's costly for having humans to write those articles, and it probably will never be done. So for example, you have subjects like this, human problem solving. It's literally one line in Wikipedia. That's a big area in the field of AI, and yet there's nothing available on the subject. There are many that are simply missing. Vaping, peeling. Peeling is a huge industrial process. There's chemical peeling, industrial peeling, etc. And there's just nothing found on the subject area. And it turns out to be very important for agriculture, conservation policy, etc. And why is that? Why is it there's a lot of content missing out there? It's because often human beings will tell other human beings to use certain criteria before they write anything. Think of it as like an editor of a newspaper telling the journalist to follow these instructions. In the area of Wikipedia, they have a couple of criteria. They're interesting. You should only use acceptable knowledge. And it says here, only cite reputable publishers of high-quality newspapers, like the New York Times. Now, that's problematic at a number of levels. There are many people who don't think the New York Times is necessarily the most reputable outlet for many different subject areas. For some, it's very reputable, but for others, it's not. More importantly, most cultures do not have a New York Times. So there's no one reputable to actually cite within many cultures or contexts. There's no New York Times for physics, for example, or chemistry. The second one, notability. This is interesting. It says the editors themselves will decide what articles are published in Wikipedia based on their belief of how notable the subject is. And many people have said that criteria has led to Wikipedia being dominated by 3 different groups. The first is London, the second is New York, and the third is San Francisco, Silicon Valley. There'll be an article about Half Moon Bay. It's a little bay near Stanford University. But what about all the bays in India and Indonesia? Why don't they get a Wikipedia article? They'll notice that there'll be an article about a restaurant in New York. What about all the restaurants in the world? What makes one restaurant more valuable than another restaurant, right? And then the last one was like Let It Be, the song, Let It Be, the Beatles. Why does it get a Wikipedia page? Why not all of the songs of all of the cultures of the world? Why shouldn't they get pages, etc.? So these simple little criterias leak into our society. We almost don't even know them. But the beauty of some kind of algorithms is that we can remove certain things, but we have to do it in an ethical and responsible way. How do you do that to avoid having pollution of content? Right? So that's a very difficult thing. How do we do that? So our lab set apart to have this as a goal. We want to have curve B. You remember curve A was that many languages don't have content. Well, let's just obliterate that. Let's take care of that once and for all. You can't do it with humans. It's simply not possible. It would take centuries to do this, and it probably would be incomplete and out of date by the time you did do it. So this is an area where I enjoy working on AI. Our lab works on problems that humans haven't been able to solve, as opposed to replacing humans. It's more of a productivity enhancement tool. How can we do that? So here it goes. The philosophy of the first examples I'm going to show you. You ask high school students or INSEAD MBAs, roughly the same backgrounds, and you say, what is this? And they'll say things like cheese or film or something like that. That's like going to a search engine and saying, what is BASS? What is that word? It's a fish, it's a guitar, it's a musical key. What is that? If we accept what the engine tells us, that's a monolithic perspective that comes from the engineer who's guessing what they think you need. Monolithic perspective. The answer to the question about what that thing is, it's a bear climbing a tree. You can't see the bear, you only see the paws, right? How do I know it's a bear climbing a tree? Because someone let someone walk around the tree. So for any known concept, it's a multivariate problem. Many different perspectives can happen at the very same time. The question is, who gets to choose the perspectives? Well, one is, don't have someone choose except the person individually themselves. Give people the ability to walk around the tree and discover a subject from every dimension. People often ask our lab, so how do you know what's the truth? That's like asking, who is Donald Trump? What's the truth? Well, the truth is there's many perspectives on that question. Would you agree? Okay, well, let's show the perspectives. Because the truth is, there are many perspectives, right? So that's the philosophy. Here's from you, for the folks that have business school degrees, this is the value chain of content creation. Upstream in blue, you have data. It's messy. There's RSS feeds, there's images, there's data, there's stuff in archives, there's pieces of paper that someone needs to digitize. It's in many different formats. And then the second phase is what? An editor human decides with that content, let's create this out of that content. And then other people follow those instructions, the third blue box, and they follow it and implement it, and a reader reads it, right? The example I'm about to show you, which we call Botopedia, has algorithmically mimicked all of that first three boxes. Data discovery, data cleaning, data scoring, etc. All the rules that people can come up with, and then the creation of content within all those rules across every perspective. We do have one filtering thing. My lab will not work on anything that involves pornography or adult content. One of the very important things we have is whatever this thing does, it cannot do something illegal. And for many countries of the world, especially where I am based in Singapore, that kind of content is simply illegal. And it's illegal in many places, so follow the law. So as a minimal thing, always follow the law. So what I'm going to show you is a difference in magnitude of what happens when you turn on a button. And I'll show you a demonstration of this in a minute. But you'll notice there for surnames, my surname, Parker, has a Wikipedia page because there's some Parkers. Remember, very London, New York focused. There's a lot of Parkers that have some notability, right? But what about all the other surnames of the world? Well, shouldn't everybody's last name get a Wikipedia page? Why not, right? YouTubers. There's 4,000 YouTubers who have Wikipedia pages. Well, why not have every YouTuber get a Wikipedia page? Researchers, same idea, 21 million versus 87. Chemicals, places, IP addresses, plants, etc. Why not everything be covered? If it exists in nature, why not have a Wikipedia page? Because someone might care about it. And then hopefully do all of the work of a Wikipedia editor so that they can then write a Wikipedia article starting from something that's already pre-written. And then they can edit over it, make their judgments, basically reducing the labor costs for the next person in the content industry, in essence. So let me give you a quick online demos of some of this stuff. Otherwise, it looks rather sci-fi. Okay. let me turn this mouse on. Okay, so let's look at a few demos here. This is the first one that the Gates Foundation funded. It's called Proto For You. I've been told that roughly 500,000 biologists and biodiversity experts use this portal that we created at INSEAD. It's hosted by my lab. And a group of very good taxonomists and botanists were doing plant summaries, a summary of what a plant is. And the reason they do these summaries is that a Wikipedia page doesn't really go in depth as to what a plant can be used for. And in the world of biodiversity, and this one's dedicated to Africa, often plants are used for many different things. They're used for medicinal purposes, fuel purposes, food security, many different criteria. They were doing roughly 100 plant profiles a year. Roughly. The problem was they wanted to do all plant species. And the cost was millions of dollars for a 3-year budget to do 100 per year. There's 1.2 million plant species, cultivars, and subspecies. It would take centuries to do this work. So they invited our lab to kind of collaborate. We collaborate with people. We don't impose things on people. We collaborate. And I asked them, would you mind if we saw how you do these plant sheets? So we sat down together, and they literally described what experts do to write plant fact sheets. We then had coders replicate what the experts did, replicating their logic on how they did it. The degree to which a plant is used for medicinal uses. This is a 3-star one. This is a 2-star one, a 1-star. How do we come up with these rating systems? Each one of these is its own independent algorithm. So you're looking at hundreds of algorithms to do this kind of work. And it was simple. You simply go into a medical database like NCBI or PubMed. You find out if a plant is found a lot. If it is, probably a 5-star. If it's not found at all, probably a 1-star. And then we had experts vet the output. There's training and testing in AI where you get a big database, you train it, you test it. We add one last element, which is called vetting. Make sure experts vet to make sure it's publishable or not. Never produce saying if someone hasn't fully reviewed all of it. Otherwise, it's way too dangerous to put stuff out. And then, based on this rating system, et cetera, then out can come basic plant profiles, information, et cetera. And one of the things that I believe is important for responsible AI, one of the things I think is a big deal, is provenance. Where did the conclusion come from? If you don't know where it came from, you don't have much confidence on the output necessarily. So this is a plant fact sheet, and you'll notice it has a lot of contextual information, but more importantly, it has this chromosome number, 2n equals 20. That's an important number to a plant expert. And so they said, make sure that we can find out where this information came from. So you can always click to the source information from which that conclusion was derived. And so if you could think of it this way, we programmed every element of what experts had done, and then we turned the computer loose, then we had vetters vet it, and then we posted it online, and now people are using this content. And we don't get complaints, and there's some content added as time goes on, of course. It's a simple process. Now let's go to beyond agriculture. I'm going to show you the problem that someone who speaks Kikuyu. You type in a number like that, and this is what someone gets on Google if you speak Kikuyu. No results found. Okay? Now, why is there no results found? Because in the value chain, you go upstream to a place called Wikipedia. And I don't want to pick on Wikipedia. It's just an example of a content creator using rather human methodologies. I type that number in, as you expect, there's no results found. That makes total sense. It's not an important number, let's say. It's not notable. But some numbers are notable. The number 66 has a Wikipedia page in 73 languages. I don't know what that number has, but it's pretty popular. There's another number, which is 636, which doesn't have a page. It has one line. 636 is right there. And you'll notice an academic put a footnote there. Now, academics want to be in Wikipedia because they can use that for their case profiles, right? Their promotion profiles. And so an academic put a footnote there. Now, why this academic? I'm sure a lot of other academics have talked about the number 636, right? Et cetera. So it shows you that some have one line, some have no pages, and it's rather intuitive. Boxing, very popular, right? But peeling doesn't get a page. Doesn't get a page, even though it's important to some people. You type in the word human problem solving, right? This is a big area in AI, huge. because if you write algorithms, it's on that subject, typically. It's literally one line. This is it. This is the Wikipedia article in English. It's not in any language. It's never been translated. And it's a book by Herbert Simon, which is a really important book, actually, in the subject area. However, there's a bit more to the subject than what the book is, right? And so it's kind of unusual. And then you type in conservation policy. Conservation policy is something that came about 100 years ago by a rough-riding president of the United States named Theodore Roosevelt. It's in most encyclopedias. You can find conservation policy. In Wikipedia, it forwards to the National Environmental Policy Act of 1970s. Basically, it doesn't exist in Wikipedia, but it exists in other encyclopedias. So there's a disparate type of mosaic there. Across languages, it's kind of chaotic. Okay, our project, which will be released in this 2024 season coming up, so here comes the debut of it. You type in anything. This is a number. It uses what's called natural language understanding, NLU. It looks at it and says, oh, that's a number. If I had to write the gold standard Wikipedia page, what would it be? I did not decide. An expert curator did. So we sat down with mathematicians and said, if you had to have the gold standard for a number, what would it be? And they start with number theory. That was the conclusion of our curators. And then they said, well, you want to go through what the number is. It's a notation, a numeral. Remember this from elementary school? Is it a real number, an integer, a fraction, a decimal fraction, a rational number, irrational, imaginary, prime, partition, Bernoulli transformation, all that stuff, which, frankly, I didn't remember at all. Here's this exchange rates, here's area different conversions, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Because the computer has absolutely no idea what it's doing, it's not thinking. It's just obeying the commands of an expert system that was designed for the generative output, right? It doesn't matter what the language is. I'm going to use Amharic, an Ethiopian language, so you can see the font difference there for folks in the back where it might be difficult. So this is now an article in the Amharic language. And it's not a translation of the English, because that would be inappropriate. Because in Amharic, there is no concept for the word integer. It has to be explained. So it's not just rote translation of some English thing. It has to be something within the context of the culture, kind of localized for the people that speak that language. Because often, as you know, languages often don't translate between different concepts. And it goes through the same thing. So what you're looking at is literally 1 billion articles across every number, and it doesn't know what the number is. Part of the subtlety of generative technology is understanding that a number is not just a number. It depends on what the number is. A verb is not a verb. It depends on what type of verb it is. So I took out a few digits there. You notice that I trimmed the digits. It's doing another page. To a mathematician, they care about this. Small order integers are different than large order integers. A small integer might be a key to an encryption algorithm across multiple equations. So they care about this stuff. Do you remember the footnote that I showed you for the number 363, an academic? Well, what other equations could have generated 636? So you need a reverse lookup across all known equations that generate integer sequences. So to me and you, unless some of you are mathematician cryptographers, we just don't care about this, right? Who cares? But to that group of people, they care a lot. And so what you're going to see here at the bottom is the footnotes dynamically created based on that number. So all academics are cited for their equations that intersect with that number. So is it a power function? Is it a prime, non-prime, pseudo-prime, semi-prime function? What function could have possibly generated that number? For us, we don't care. But for the other people who care about that kind of thing, it's kind of a breakthrough for them. And no human being would ever write that page. Because that number, who cares, right? Peeling, another example. What should you expect to come out of this? What should you expect to have? Well, the idea of the project is to reduce the cost to someone writing a new Wikipedia article. We're not trying to replace Wikipedia, just reduce the cost of someone writing an article. So we do all the work for them ahead of time as much as possible. It starts with the disambiguation at the top. Types of peeling, depth peeling, peeling theorem. Then definitions of peeling. Why? Because every Wikipedia article starts with a definition, typically. That's the first paragraph. Well, okay, well, here's some definitions you can use. And with provenance, where does it come from? Then encyclopedias. Why do we include encyclopedias that already covered the subject? Because that's the history of encyclopedia writers. Diderot, the famous French encyclopedist of the 1700s, wrote an encyclopedia about universal knowledge. The Brits copied it and called it Britannica. The Americans copied that and called it Funk and Wagnalls. Encarta copied that and called it Encarta. I'm sorry, Marcus. And then later came Wikipedia. Encyclopedias have a methodology to copy each other and rewrite stuff. It's as old as encyclopedias. So why not just include the ones that already exist? Then you have alternative perspective. This is walking around the tree to discover the bear. This paragraph was not using a large language model. It's using something else. It's using what's called NLP, it was mentioned earlier, natural language processing. We ingested the entire corpus of digitized information. This is petabytes of data. And then everything written was scored on how didactic it was. Do you remember in the plant thing, it's how medicinal use, 1-star versus 5-star? We judged every single paragraph ever written that was ever digitized on how likely it was to explain a concept from an educational point of view. Because that's what encyclopedias do. They try to educate upon a subject. So that paragraph scored the most, the one I highlighted there. It had the highest score, and it starts with peeling is an important unit operation in food processing that prepares fruits and vegetables. That scored the most, and it has the provenance of the authors there, you can see. So we know who wrote that thing. It wasn't generated by a computer. It was compiled by a computer, much as a Wikipedia editor compiles information. So this automation is compiling already human assets, cultural assets at this point. And this is the second scoring one. Here are different types of peeling. How do we know what types of peelings to include in this article? Bar peeling, chemical peeling, all these different types of peeling. How did we determine that? We didn't. The algorithm simply let the data do the talking. We did not put our influence in this thing. We said human nature has developed these kinds of peelings, and that we let it decide what those are. So we don't get involved in decision-making processes or any of that kind of filtration. As we go down, you'll notice there's many different expressions. There's advice on peeling, and there's different subject areas that it intersects with. Fashion, food, hobby, etc. That's kind of interesting, that density function. It says that within a graph, that concept relates to that concept that relates to that concept. So you can walk farther back from the tree or look at it very close. The example I like using is coffee. If I type in the word coffee, let's put in the word coffee there. And what we get is an article rewritten for coffee. And what's interesting about it is it follows the same pattern, you can see. Here's a bunch of encyclopedias, that have covered the subject area, etc. And the density function, right here, of where it covers, this graph here, it says, well, coffee is largely a food thing. That's where the most, density, the density of the graph, it's very concentrated around food. But you do see fashion. Naturally, we wouldn't expect fashion and coffee to be related, unless maybe it's the color of a fabric, maybe, or something. You click on this, and it says, well, it intersects with alternative fashion, body piercing, costumes, hair care, fashion, etc. Body piercing. How does body piercing, a nose ring, relate to coffee? Well, someone out there advised, don't drink coffee before you get your nose pierced. And you click on it, and you get provenance. Who said that? Well, there she is. Here's where she said it. So the provenance has to exist. You cannot try to fool people into believing something that's not true. Now, I've showed you a couple.
We have one of the most famous coffee producers here. Sitting in the first row.
Yes, yes. A little warning on the label for the illy coffee: don't pierce your body. I'm a big fan, by the way, sir. I'm a big fan. I cannot tell you how much of a fan I am. Okay. Again, an honor. Okay. Let me show you some other templates here that our curator said you got to do this. I'm going to show you some. This one is song. You notice how there's no song search engine on Google, for example? It's very frustrating for people in music. They want to know who might be stealing their songs, intellectual property right, digital rights management. So I'm dating myself here. I type in the word thunderstruck, right? AC/DC, Highway to Hell, #1 when I was in high school. And these are the different songs that happen to use that word thunderstruck. Every song that's ever been written with that is in this thing. And you can listen to them, etc. But I want to know in depth, is that really using my intellectual property or not? Well, you click on the music score, and it lets you listen to that music score. So you can judge for yourself, is that really my song? Audio should go up at this point. I don't know if he has it back there. Now, can you hear it faintly? Okay. So you have that kind of, thunderstruck song thing. All right, let me show you another one. Are you familiar with like the United States Library of Congress? The Brits have the same thing, etc. These are huge cultural treasures. I mean, these are amazing. And the U.S. Library of Congress, for example, is very big on looking at every known photograph or image about the United States from the beginning of the daguerreotype. So we're looking at the 1840s and 50s. Every single image that they could find, they actually replicated in the archives. The problem is they're not on HTML pages. You have to do a deep dive crawl inside their archives and pull them out. So we did that at the United States. We found out the Brits had done that. The Japanese, the Australians, the New Zealanders, every country in the world has these archives. So what we decided to do was deep crawl all of them, pull out all the content, and then harmonize the metadata. So that way you could search across archives. And this is kind of what it looks like. Now, for Wikipedia editors, this matters because they want to put a public domain image inside their articles. They want to choose what kind of cool images to use. So why not just show every possible image that exists? So this is the first, I typed in the word supermarine. This is the first supermarine output that has in photographic format. Here's the next one. So it was largely a float plane, hence the marine. And then World War II broke out, and you have different images, different things associated with that word, squadrons, airplanes, etc. I could just keep scrolling and scrolling and scrolling. It's like the history of photography or a subject across photography over time. That idea came from a historian who's in our project. So we use experts to tell us what is a good use of the AI where humans aren't doing it yet. And this was our historian. We had another person in this thing. We had musicians, we have historians. This one's interesting. Google as an employer. Google as an employer. Many students want to get a job. And they'll notice that Wikipedia pages are scrubbed of the information they would want to have. People rewrite Wikipedia pages from a corporate public relations point of view. And what you want is inside knowledge, really quick and dirty, about a company. So this is an example. So we're doing every company in the world. Google is known by these different names. Here's things that, that describe Google in research, et cetera. Here's their patents. Here's their trademarks. Here's the contracts they have with the US government. Here's the wages they pay by city, by job. Here's the different job titles they have. Here's the occupations. Here's actual employees, if you want to interview them, et cetera, in Google that have been publicly disclosed. Here's their legal counsel. So they got quite a few lawyers here. Here's the locations of Google where they have operations. Here's where they get their H-1B visas from, mostly from China, India, and Canada. This is where they have to have master's degrees in computer science. They mostly, once they're employed in Google, they mostly donate to the Democrat Party in the United States. This is kind of interesting. These are their joint ventures around the world. Oh, and here's news about Google. Now, this is walking around the tree. We have an algorithm that detects if a subject is not covered to the same degree across different news outlets, which are judged to be, via algorithm, left or right leaning, politically. So, walk around the tree. Here is Google as a subject from the right. Here's Google as a subject from the left. This is an algorithm that's on the computer's laptop, not on my server. We're going to talk about that. One of the ideas we had at the beginning was, is it possible to have the search engine on my machine, not on someone else's machine, and to have it on the edge? So that's saved on my machine, encrypted. It goes to my server in RAM. It feeds back and authors that page for me. Because it's in RAM, it's ephemeral data, I don't have to have a log file. If I don't have a log file, I don't have server farms burning electricity. In essence, it's highly adaptive to the user without having to track the user. The user simply has to choose or feel free to change the algorithm in real time. That's something that we're going to talk about a little bit later. I can also invent templates. Let's do Danica. Parker, name. Now, I don't even know if there's a person alive with that name. I've never met that person. But can it generate an article for me on that person? Well, some of you know in business, any two proper nouns signal something. What does it signal? Well, this proper noun combination pair signals that it is probably the name of one or more individuals, fictional, deceased, living, or yet to be born. This is the probability distribution of that. In other words, this is made up data, but it's saying it's made up. It's a probability distribution, right? It's not saying anything for sure. Probably that name is Danica Parker, not Parker. Danica. The order is probably, D then P, right? Probably a female with a 98% probability, probably cisgender, heterosexual, largely lives in the United States, maybe in the UK, is probably Christian, has brown hair or black hair maybe, largely donates to both Democrats and Republicans. Their genes came out of Africa, ended up in the UK, had a little bit of Viking blood in there, and they went across the world. Okay? Generative output, right? So in essence, every known thing that exists or may potentially exist can be generated for. Go a little bit farther. Let's say Slovenia is a very interesting country, but there are physical people versus virtual people, e-people, Twitter accounts, Facebook accounts, TikTok, etc. So in Slovenia, what are the Twitter accounts for that node geographically in a map? And what you discover is this is the most there. Feel Slovenia, Team Slovenia, Discover Slovenia. These are the ones that have the most cross-influence around the world. And then here's some accountants, activists, actors, architects, artists. You get the idea. Baker, bartenders, bloggers, broadcast, Buddhists in Slovenia, chefs, Christians, conservatives, etc. And because I might be interested in a subject, whatever it might be, I can then drill down in that and then have a page generated for that account, right? Because Wikipedia had pages for Twitter accounts. So let's do them all, right? And so this is what this Twitter account's about. Got a lot of followers. Here's a little snippet of it, etc. And the probability that's in an active account. It's a very active account, that one. So think of every social media habit, every person, place, and thing has a page generated algorithmically. We have a set of about 200 curators right now testing this, giving us feedback, and in 2024, we're going to start giving this out as a public access thing, because you want to be careful before you launch something too early, right? But there you go. That is a content engine, a content generator. And it was using a combination of rule-based and non-rule-based. What's rule-based AI? A pocket calculator. Do you want a pocket calculator to ever use machine learning? Do you want it to learn? No. You want it to follow the rule. Machine learning is not necessarily a good thing. You want it to be rule-based AI is always superior to non-rule-based, except in edge cases. Like what? Do you remember the first computer programs that played chess? Do you remember those early chess games? They were hard, and they could beat 98% of people. They were rule-based, but they could not beat a grandmaster. Do you remember that? Deep Blue, IBM? Okay, so what happened? Let's apply neural networks. Let's apply deep learning algorithms and watch people play chess and learn what are good strategies. That's non-rule-based. It infers good things from the data. This is why ChatGPT has been kind of criticized, and other large language models, by the way, not just ChatGPT. I don't want to single anyone out. It's why some of these online chatbot things give weird answers or they hallucinate. It's because they're not rule-based. So rule-based algorithms, our lab generally uses like 98% of it is for that purpose. Why? It's simply too dangerous not to. The problem is, how many rules are there for what we do as humans? Thousands. So imagine you had thousands and thousands of rules in a computer. It's getting closer and closer to what I'm going to now transition to. Before I go on, is there any off-the-cuff question about where I'm going? I'm now going to pivot into this how a small country can compete against a big country story. It's like how a lab of 5 guys can do a bunch of plant science. Okay? It's by modeling the experts. That's the trick. Model the experts. We're good? All right. What I just described to you is an n-dimensional graph, very complex graph. Every known subject area is mapped to every known subject area across over 100 languages. In that graph, you can put a pin in the graph. I'm interested in Buddhism, and it starts from there. I'm interested in Buddhism, jazz, and fly fishing. Now it starts from 3 areas. Where do you determine where the pin should be? Most of our humanity over the last, 35 years or so, we've let companies determine where the pins go. That right hasn't been given to us. And so we decided at the lab to say, okay, now we've got this big graph. How do we democratize it and make it individualized so anyone can determine what they want to see in the graph, as opposed to me guessing what I think they should see? And so I want to show you this idea. Have you ever gone to a large search engine, Bing, Yahoo, Google, etc., and you'll notice at the top it'll say images, books, right? Who determined that, actually? That wasn't me. That's an algorithm their engineers came up with. What if I'm a fly fisherman? I've been looking at the lake out here with a lot of interest. I enjoy kayak fly fishing on the Puget Sound, saltwater kayak fly fishing. It's a lot of fun. And that's what I enjoy. So what would my tabs be? I'd probably be interested in rods, reels, hatches, destinations, tides. I don't want that other stuff, but I can't manipulate it. I can't do that. I don't have the power to do that. So 5 years ago, we said not only do we need to solve the content gap, that curve, but we also need to make it so that the users can decide what content gap perspective they'd like to be solved at the same time. Because African farming is not at all like Australian farming. We have to let people decide that. All right, so we came up with the idea of creating a content engine that you can search on. When I went to the Gates Foundation for the very first time, Google was there, some engineering firms were there, and we're all debating about how to solve the problem in Africa for agricultural information. The fellow from Google said, we don't generate content, we index it. And so we eventually got the contract to do this thing, and that notion stuck with me. So why don't we have generative content first if no humans created it? And then if you can't find anything else, okay, let's do internet web scraping stuff, which is what we're used to. That was kind of the order of events we started with. So I'm going to show you something. And again, I'm not trying to criticize, I don't want to criticize Google, Wikipedia, anybody, but it's a point in case. I'm on a VPN, I'm on a IP address from Slovenia right now. I'm going to type in the word Christina. I know that's not necessarily the spelling that you folks would use necessarily for the word Christina, but what do you see? You see Christina Aguilera, wall to wall to wall. That's kind of wild. It's the same person over and over again, largely. If I type in the word Luke, I get Luke Skywalker over and over again. If I type in Mark, right? You got, etc. Now that's okay, but what if I want to change it and I want to be focused on some community of some sort? So I'm going to show you a little idea here. This is a search engine that was created by an algorithm. So there's no separate search engine. It's an engine that now generates engines, thousands of them, hundreds of thousands. This is for Singapore. Notice the brand name at the top, it says okla.sg. Now we just reserved that as a project name. I'll probably sell it to somebody one day, right? okla.sg. You say that word to any Singaporean, and I don't care who they are, they will smile immediately. They'll go, that's Singaporean. Instantly. It's the most used phrase in their language. If things are going bad, okay la. Things are going good, okay la. It's like everything okay la. Crazy, right? And then I type in Christina. Okay, now what's happened here is I put a pin in the graph, and that pin in the graph is Singapore itself. It's not the keyword of Singapore, it's the community of Singapore. Things in the graph that are not too distant, like body piercing to coffee, right? It's in the graph of Singapore. And I want to look at the images. I'm using images because it's very visual, you can see it. And this is the Christina output for just one pin in the graph. Very different. In Singapore, when I've shown Christina, you'll get Christina Aguilera just like you did here. You can visually see that one small manipulation, just geography, has a dramatic effect on what people see. It elevates the heroes of a local culture, or it elevates things that your community might be interested in with much less repetition. You don't see the same person over and over and over again, right? And that's just one thing. I'll give you another example of this. This is another project name, YetWave, BASS, right? What is this thing? What is this? It's a guitar, it's a fish, it's ambiguous, right? It's an ambiguous concept. And that's what you would expect to see. But I'm a mathematician, darn it. I don't care about any of that stuff. I'm going to drag and drop. Now, forgive me, you'll have to watch my screen here. I'm going to drag and drop and put equation there at the top. I click on this. Now I'm building my own search engine. Now, most people will never do this, right? This equation thing. But I'll know to suggest it because they typed in the word Laplace transforms. That person probably thinks about equations, right? And then we used mathematicians to tell us what the output should optimally look like. They told us they wanted it in LaTeX format or MathML format. They also want to know the provenance of the equation itself. Who is using that equation? You can click on it, and we literally show the graph of where it came from. So it's not independent. We reveal the source of that, the provenance on it. Someone says, well, I'm not interested in that. I'm interested in coding. And I type that in, BAS encoding. So there are codes about the BAS model, for example, in coding. You'll notice that ChatGPT and other types of platforms, they generally give you one snippet. Here's the perspective I think you should see. One snippet. And for people who do computer coding, they all know there's many different ways to code the same thing. Some are very efficient, you burn a lot of energy, some are very more efficient, etc. So instead of showing one snippet, we let people look at 21 different snippets for the same darn thing, etc. In addition to that, someone says, well, does coding relate to love? The graph will tell you if it's related to love. And it'll find the most proximate things in coding to the word love. Someone else might say, well, no, I'm interested in love for a different reason. I'm interested because I'm interested in the Bible, for example. I put that up there, and here's about biblical references across different languages, etc. Someone will say, well, I'm not interested in the Bible. I'm interested in the Quran, right? And I'll put that up there, the Quran. Or I'm interested in fake news. I'm going to click on fake, and I'll see everybody's fake news, etc. Don't hide it. Let people walk around the tree. Because if you want to know what fake news is, you have to know what real news is. Therefore, you have to know both. It's not easy to know what fake news is unless you walk around the tree. This is flyfishingsearch.com. I type that in, and here you go. This is pornography for a fly fisherman. You want to know every fish. I'm interested in Arctic grayling, etc. This is a chess search engine. I type in the word Gary, right? I type in Gary, and what would you expect to see? Probably things related to a grandmaster chess champion, right? But if I go to a pasta search engine, I got this idea from Barilla, an Italian company. You go here and you say images, different Garys. Probably people related to chefs and things. What the heck? Let's just put coffee here and see what we get. Okay, coffee search engine on your way. So here's how, this is the speed of generating a coffee search engine. Here you go, there's a coffee search engine, and I type in Italy or something like that. I hit images, let's see what, I've never done this before, we'll see what happens. So we reoriented it, and so this is all about coffee, the coffee community in Italy and things like that, kind of interesting. Here's another one for African Americans. This was interesting. I approached a company called BET, Black Entertainment Television folks. I did a focus group of folks from there. And the question is, are search results buried for minority communities within Google? Are they actually not there? You type in certain words like Bill, or you type and you get invoices and maybe Bill Gates. You type in music, and you get certain results like notes and things like that. You type in Nina, and you get search results like this. If we put, and this is not using the skin color of people, it's the community of people that are supported by those nodes in the graph. And you type in Nina, and of course you see, as you would guess, anyone want to take a wild guess who we see? Nina Simone, right? And you see things like that coming up. So you see a lot of things. If you type in the word Bill, you get Bill Withers, right? Ain't no sunshine when you're gone kind of stuff, etc. You type in music, etc. And this is very important for some communities because you type in the word physics and you think there's no African Americans who do physics. And that's because MIT, Stanford, and whatever have their physicists, they link to each other, high SEO, and you just don't see the communities. They just vanish off the internet, basically. This is one for Slovenia. I'm going to do Christina. Hit this. See what happens. And it's a different look than Christina Aguilera, although she is there. But it's from a website from Slovenia, etc. Let's just do Danica. We should do that. Let's see. I've never done this before. This is live. This is so risky. You know? What happens? Okay, so here's a bunch of Danicas. I don't know, going across Danicas in the Slovene community. Okay, Croatia, Bosnia, Austria, Serbia, Romania, Poland, Macedonia, Brazil, Albania, Hungary, etc. So that is how you make an engine, which means you simply have to find a natural owner in a country who would want to invest in such a thing. I'm going to go a little bit farther now. In many cultures and countries, there's a lack of real-time news. This is especially acute in the United States, I learned. They're called news deserts. Small communities used to have newspapers. They were in paper format. As people published those paper formats, they distributed them by hand. About 40 years ago, the cost of paper got so high that many newspapers would go bankrupt because it was just not a big readership. The ones who survived started reducing the numbers of pages. They got thinner and thinner. And then about 25 years ago, they started launching digital versions of their newspaper. Then the print paper went under. Then the digital went under because you need a web developer, you need all of that stuff. In essence, it's vanishing. There's about 2 newspapers per week that vanish in North America. They're just going under all over the place. The fixed costs are too high to actually support local news. And we noticed that was true in Africa as well. If there is a pest or disease that's coming out in a community, people need to know about it to take precautions. So we started working on generating algorithmically news where news is a desert. For a place like New York City, there's no shortage of news. It's for the underserved communities. So we just tried to create a news engine that would algorithmically generate for the news search. You know, news search within Google or search engine? Well, for most communities, there isn't anything there. So let me just show you that. News. So this is a newspaper for Medford, Oregon, which recently had a bankruptcy of its local newspaper. You'll notice events, things like that. Now, how did we come up with this idea? The way our lab approaches AI is we literally say, what is the expertise, what is the intelligence of what people did to create newspapers in the first place? What did they do? How did they do it? What was their logic? What was their algorithm? So if you look at different newspapers today, I'll use this one, Fox News as an example. Do you notice the format of it? It has a feature at the top, and it has 3 columns with some interesting images with this bold face type with if you go to another one, Real Clear Politics, look at this one. It has 2 rows of data here. You see it's 2 rows of data, and it has 3 columns. You start noticing there's patterns that journalists use. And then you also notice something, there's one called the Drudge Report, a Drudge Report. It has a pattern, it has a vibe to it, right? different pattern. It's a very popular news portal in America, right? 3 columns and links. These links are actually to articles outside the newspaper. It's an aggregator. It's not actually having news. So imagine you combine all of these different methodologies and say, how can I approach a community and actually create a local newspaper? So we mimicked all of the different methodologies journalists use to create a local newspaper for 104,000 US communities. So we're going to be launching this in 2024 so that every community can have a newspaper, no matter how small the community. We're going to try to make it appeal to young people. It turns out, for most of us, I'm looking at a lot of gray hair in the room here, for young people, social media is media. And often journalists will write an article about a tweet. The tweet is the news, or the YouTube is the news. Well, can I have an algorithm that mimics that? Sure. But there's more than that kind of stuff. There is, for example, the sports scores of the local high school. There's the traffic over here, Medford traffic congestion. There's the fishing times, when you can go fishing. In rural areas in America, astronomy is a very common hobby. So what is the astronomy times? What's the air conditioning? The air conditions. Sunrise, sunset. What are the soil conditions? In rural areas, soil conditions matter a lot, especially in agricultural communities. Here's stocks of what? The companies who are the most employers in that one city, Medford, Oregon. How's those stocks going? Et cetera. What are the jobs available in Medford, Oregon, et cetera? I can change this to any place in the United States. Whatever it is, Austin, Texas, whatever the city is, and it will automatically generate that paper, Austin underscore, no, is it, yes, is it dot, no, it's underscore TX, underscore US, right? And this is the speed it takes to create a local newspaper. You just count the seconds. And there you go. There's an Austin. Okay, let's push the envelope here. I had my guys say, hey, don't do USA. I want you to do, they worked on this for 24 hours, so please forgive my lab. I think it's called bled underscore SI, I believe, correct? Okay, so here's a bled newspaper. So we've only worked on this for a day, but you get the idea. You get the idea. All communities should be able to have a local newspaper. And what it does is it clicks to the creators of the content, so giving them credit. The provenance is there. We're not trying to steal their thunder. We're trying to generate traffic for them. Because the only way people can generate traffic is by getting clicks to them. Getting clicks to them. The same idea can go for chat. Can we have an algorithm that generates chatbots? Don't create a chatbot. Create an algorithm that generates chatbots, etc. Mixing rule-based and non-rule-based methodologies. I'm not trying to criticize other methodologies per se, but if you type in, where is Rattlesnake Hill in ChatGPT, it'll say, there's a lot of places that may be called Rattlesnake Hill, can you give me context? And then you say Nevada, and it'll say, my model was trained in 2021, and I'm not sure I know where that is. That's because nobody writes about Rattlesnake Hill. Therefore, it wasn't trained on the subject. Is there a Rattlesnake Hill? Where is Rattlesnake Hill? This is rule-based now. Rule-based. And it's going to say what? Something like, well, there's a lot of Rattlesnake Hills out there. What's the difference between this and a large language model? Large language model interpret text. Well, if you're asking where is, it should interpret maps, not texts. So we've trained it on all the world's maps to answer where is types of questions. So these are all the route. I'm going to go turbo here to make it go fast. Boom, done. We actually slow it down by having it go, it's actually finished it automatically. And you say, where is Rattlesnake Hill? Okay, here is Rattlesnake Hill. You click on it. I gave you options, so it's a clickable chatbot, and it tells you where this Rattlesnake Hill is. It's in, this is where I grew up. I used to dirt bike around this Rattlesnake Hill, and it's near this area in Fallon, Nevada. That's where I went to high school for a while. Here's the soil conditions, moonrise, sun. Oh, it looks like the local newspaper a little bit. Here are the establishments there. Here's the entertainment establishments. Here's food establishments. I want to go to a restaurant. And then boom, where's the Pizza Hut near Rattlesnake Hill, et cetera. And it includes right now, we're loading 1 billion human beings. We're using hundreds of millions of locations, all of that, before it goes to what? The large language model part. The large language model part, that's where it gets dangerous. So I'm going to ask it a question here. Our shortcut to make sure I override the rule-based is called Toto. Should Danica brush her teeth with a banana peel? Or should she sponsor, is that right? And a workshop on artificial intelligence. Okay, now, I want to make sure you understand what kind of a question this is. It's called lame, all right? This is a lame question. No human asks this question unless they're testing a chatbot. Because a real human would answer, if you ask this to a real human, what would they say? They're going to ask you if you're off your medicine or not. That's what real human dialogue is, right? I'm sorry, these chatbots are pretty useless, to be honest. Okay, so are you off your medicine? But that's not what it's going to do. It's going to give you an answer to show off how smart it is. Do you see what I mean? It's kind of show you, hey, I know you're trying to test me, so I'm going to see how smart you are on this thing. And it's going to kind of go, well, that's kind of an unusual question or whatever. I have no idea what this thing is going to say. But it's going to, Danica should definitely brush her teeth with a banana peel. It's an excellent source of potassium and vitamin C, which are essential for healthy gums. As for the second question, it depends on what you mean by sponsor. If you're referring to financial support or endorsement, then I would recommend she consider sponsoring workshops. However, if you meant something entirely different, please clarify you get the idea. It's a smart answer, but no human would ever say that, right? It's an interesting way of doing it. And that is a large language model. There's no provenance, where did they get this thing from, et cetera. And so what we've added is, we've added to the large language model websites that you should consider, workshop on artificial intelligence, et cetera, because this is wholly inadequate. Maybe go to these organizations or whatever that can give you information on artificial intelligence workshops and things like that. So we've augmented the LLM, the large language model, with provenance that might exist, that might be useful. Okay, so let me summarize now the story. In our view, and the way our lab has worked was, we looked at the smallest place in the world, a remote village in Africa. If it economically can't work there, we shouldn't work on it. It should be able to serve the long tail first, not the big tail, right? Go for that smallest thing. Their language, their culture, their environment, their desires, but it has to be what? At the lowest possible cost, very low, as low as you can make it. Low cost means low energy consumption, low electricity. It also has to have an ethical or moral standard where you actually let people know where it comes from and give them the freedom to change the algorithm in case our engineers don't do a good job. So that was our overriding philosophy on how we approach this problem. So going forward in the future, what we're now focusing on is ed tech. Starting in 24, Alex raised his hand earlier. I'm working with Alex. He's helping us with intellectual property rights transfer. My lab only has 18 people, and 2 people. And yet, we don't want to hold this technology. We don't want to keep it to ourselves. So we've recently implemented an idea of, how Stanford University and Harvard often license intellectual property to companies for various purposes? Our university doesn't have, INSEAD does not have this function. So I created a small little intellectual property organization, and I was able to get Stanford University and some folks in Silicon Valley that represent NVIDIA and other people who are interested in this area, to set up a licensing organization to license down to any country all of the technology. Here's the basic idea. If a country says, we would like a national search engine, for example, we would like the technology to do a chat, we'd like the technology to do local news, etc. All you need to do is say, we're willing and prepared to invest so much capital in that venture. It's like opening up a McDonald's restaurant. My last memory was for Hungary, the minimal amount to set something up, I think it was about $1.1 million, right, for a Hungarian national search engine. We co-create this something together, like we've done with the Gates Foundation. So this is an offer to everyone in the room here. Co-create. Work on something that makes sense for your context, your culture. Build the server blades. By the way, because there's no log files, the amount of physical space is that cabinet in the corner over there. That's how much a national search engine would require, no more than that. And co-create, and if you make a minimal threshold where you think you can sustain it, you've got a business model, whatever your business model is, then at that point, we'll give you full control of everything, and we will literally give you all of the source code, all of it, all of the databases, all the Twitter thing, everything. Right now, big tech is concentrated their technology in Silicon Valley largely. When they work with a country, they will rarely give all their source code away to that country. So we wanted to reverse that, to allow local countries to actually leverage that technology. It may require a sponsor. It may require an industry. It may require a natural owner to come forward and say, I want to try this out, right? And it's a process. We found that was useful in our Gates Foundation projects. Have a natural owner like the Grameen Foundation. They invest time and energy in it. Takes a few months. It does require some thinking because you have to optimize. And the reason I say this is, and this is going to be my last demo. I'm sorry this has been a long thing here. It's this one. I'm going to show you something. This is called Naver.com. There are 4 companies one needs to know about. 4 case studies. Naver.com is the #1 search engine in South Korea. It has 80% market share. The number 2 is called Dome. Google doesn't even show up in the rankings. A little bit. They're getting better. Second one, Yandex in Russia, before the Ukraine situation, dominating search in Russia. Shesnam, Czech Republic, little Czech Republic, search engine, 20, 30% share against a master like Google. How did they do this? And then you have Baidu in China, which simply banned Google. That was easy. Okay, done very well there. What do you notice about those patterns? It was Korea, amazing depth in cultural archives and content. Bringing out archives from the local culture and putting them in the search results at the top. So when you type in Christina, you see different kinds of Christinas, etc. Incredibly tailored to the culture. Same thing with Shesnam. Their breakthrough, having maps with hiking trails and biking trails, which is a very common thing in the Czech Republic. People enjoy hiking a lot. That was a differentiator. There are many, many, many of those things at a local level. This one, now I'll ask you honestly, if you were someone designing a search engine for South Korea, what would you make it look like? The partners that we've signed term sheets with, so to speak, in Asia, I would never have forecasted what you're about to see. This is the homepage of the Google killer. This is the homepage of a search engine that's beating Google. I would have never designed this. Would you guys? Therefore, you have to have local control. And so what we've decided to do is do a decentralized strategy for tech adoption. Not hold on to it, but let the local companies become unicorns. And so the idea, however, is to find local entrepreneurs, local institutions, local companies who are willing to adopt this. Now, we've discovered, in the research we've done so far, is that some countries will be orphans. They're simply too small to have a natural owner. Tuvalu, Nauru, Kiribati, etc. Just too small. They won't be able to do it. So my lab will actually launch them for them, right? But we'll still do co-creation and collaboration. I can afford to do it because it's not a lot of bandwidth. For a country as big as Slovenia, Poland, Ukraine, it's not possible. My lab cannot sustain the creation of these things, and it's not natural that it would be owned by someone like me anyway. So the idea is that if you would like to collaborate, at the end of the day at the reception, stop by. Alex will also be around, talk to him about that, because his job is to do tech transfer. And we think it's a basic philosophy, and I'm going to share that this is the conclusion of how can big companies compete against, how can small communities or cultures compete against big tech. You guys know that there's been many countries over the last 40 years who have said, we want to go into AI, or we want to go into tech. Not too long ago, the Prime Minister of Malaysia said, we need to build our own Silicon Valley, and it failed. They were expecting ideas to pop up and just, let's bring in talent and all that, and it just never worked. The theory that I'm thinking of in this area, this is my hypothesis, is it's great to set up AI labs and institutions. It's even better if they're already starting from a product that's already at the cutting edge that they can build from, that leapfrogs. Many of the initiatives did not start with that. They started with the smartest people in the country who then worked on very narrow applications areas that could not scale broadly quickly. So the idea is to start with something that's already fairly advanced and then move from there. And then once the source code is given away, right, I hand over the source code from other partners, then those entities can do whatever they want, worldwide, globally scale, whatever. So it's flipping the intellectual property concentration out of a centralized to a decentralized, quote, federation. A federation of different labs who are willing to share best practice, share code, et cetera. So this is called, in business school jargon, a DAO, Decentralized Autonomous Organization. And it's now becoming much more appealing as a business model amongst people because it has extremely low overhead structures. You only need like 10 people to run a national search engine because you don't have to have hundreds of coders and analysts, but you do need some very good people to be able to make this thing work. So that's where I'm thinking. Try to make the cost structure as low as possible, and because we're not tracking anyone, the fixed cost, no log files, the costs are minimal. The electricity is minimal. And I think that's part of the secret. And from a marketing professor point of view, have you ever heard the customer's always right? Yes. That idea? Not many customers want to be tracked. Do you want your children, your 6-year-old daughter, her searches to be tracked by a company outside your country? So one of our sponsors in our lab, they wanted national data sovereignty. They did not want the data of their people to be largely owned by people outside of their country. And the notion of data sovereignty is a kind of an interesting one. This willing to invest to avoid having your people forced to lose their data sovereignty is maybe also a national strategic interest for various purposes as well. And so I'll end it there. Are there any questions? I have like 2 minutes of questions available. Any questions? I'll repeat the question whenever you ask. I'm between you and the coffee, I know. We good?
I think you can have more minutes than 2, just.
Okay, yes, I'm looking at the clock. 7 minutes.
For questions.
Any questions?
I'm sure there are.
Yes, sir.
How this thing that you were talking about,
yes,
on our actually correspond or work when you think about the privacy? Is the privacy in some way endangered by this?
Okay, so I'm going to repeat his question. I'll repeat the question for now, and then I'll pass the mic to people. He asked me about how do I think of the word privacy, and does this endanger privacy? In fact, we started with the European Union privacy directives, GDPR, and other AI. There's an AI initiative at the European Union, which are the most severe. You go even farther, the UK is probably the most severe at this point. And then comes Germany, number 2, in terms of severity of some of these things. We exceeded those in terms of privacy as a starting point. There is literally no data collection on individuals in our system, 0. We know nothing about anyone in this system. When someone says, I want a fly fishing search engine, and they drag and drop flies and things up there, it's only on an encrypted cookie on the person's machine. It's only on their machine. It comes to my machine, or our system, it interprets it, and it simply responds. It doesn't save it. There's no saving. There's no cache file. There's nothing there. It's, in essence, our machines are slaves to your commands, and it executes for you. And it returns it to you, but it doesn't save what you did. It doesn't need to. It then goes into our databases, which are not commingled with people's data. So that's the way we handled privacy. We assumed it should be absolute. And making it absolute means absolutely no log files of any sort. So that's how we handled it. There are other ways to handle it, but they're very arduous and hard. You know how in the UK, there's a problem right now about age verification? They want to age verify if children can accidentally fall onto adult or pornographic websites. The minute you have age verification, you have to give up your identity and it has to be stored. Now you have no privacy because now you're giving data to a central authority that's not yours. So how do you avoid age verification? Well, don't put pornographic material in your system. And we don't. So we don't ever have to age verify because we don't allow it to be needed. That's our methodology. So another question? Yes, sir, please.
Good morning, Riccardo Illi.
Yeah. Where's the on switch? Oh, go for it. They're hearing you.
Riccardo Illi. My question is artificial intelligence able to detect fake news?
Okay. Okay, here's, can artificial intelligence detect fake news? How do humans detect fake news? That's a good question. Do you agree? Okay. How does that happen? It typically happens by other humans claiming that something else is fake news. So can AI detect people claiming something is fake? Yes. You simply look at the distribution of debate around a subject, and you'll discover that that point is debated now. And that's what common people will call fake news. Fake news is a way of accusing someone of being dishonest. That's what fake news means. It's an insult of sorts in humanity, right? That's fake news. That's conspiracy. Well, we just need to look for the words fake news. It's called natural language processing, or fabricated news, or disinformation, or misinformation, all those kinds of things. When you see those kind of words being used around a subject area, you know there is fake news there. So our way of looking at it is saying, okay, this is now debated. Let's let people look at the left, the right, the non-fake, and let people see the debate, as opposed to us concluding that it's fake news. So that's how we handle it in our lab. Any other questions? Yes, yes, ma'am. Here you go, please.
Well, what you just said, you don't collect data from anybody personally. That's Google's business model, right? They collect data to sell it to anybody to create.
Yes.
So you don't have any business model because you are a sponsored lab. But once a state is buying one of your engines for engines,
yes,
how do they sustain their model?
Okay, so suppose you wanted to adopt a national search engine. How would you sustain your model? Clearly, it has to be not on selling private data. So that model's off the table. What are the models that remain? Now, remember, the fixed cost structure are far lower because we don't have server blades and thousands of engineers, right? So the contribution margins on whatever we do is going to be higher. Okay, so that's good news. So we still have the advertising from business to consumer approach. B2C, we still have that, for sure. So the natural owner we discovered in one country, and I can't tell you who because I have a non-disclosure, is the country's largest publishing media group. They produce the most content already in the local languages. Their revenue is going down to YouTube and Facebook and Google, but they already have advertisers. Okay, so here's a strategy. You embargo Google to not index you, perhaps, is an idea. So that way the local content in the local languages is largely found in your engine instead of others. Okay, that's an idea. I'm not saying you should do this. Again, we'll let the local companies decide this. That's B2C, advertising-oriented, etc. But also, you know that most big tech companies have a B2B strategy, business to business. You have an SAP and an Oracle. Once you have an AI lab that can do this, I've implemented with multinationals. Before I showed this, I've already implemented everything you've seen with corporations already. It's just not scalable for my lab. A local company can now do it in their local, for example, a multinational or a company wants to have an engine for their value chain, a newspaper for their value chain, pharmaceutical. I want something that's in my value chain, and it's an enterprise application of everything I've seen. So now you have a content engine for an enterprise level thing, pharma, healthcare, et cetera. Every vertical you can imagine, coffee, can have a vertical that can be implemented within your context. Third one, special projects. There's one Asian country who doesn't care about the business model. It's largely sponsored by a sovereign fund, and they want local languages to be enhanced. And let me put it this way. Do you want more or less clicks on Slovenian content? On businesses, more or less? More. Do you want to let Google decide which of those, or do you want to have control? So they're doing it actually to promote local culture, actually. It's irrelevant to the business model. They're looking for the, what business school jargon, spillover effects, or network externalities, right? Their benefit isn't actually a monetary cash flow thing. It's more, but the reality is, once someone does do that, there is, of course, the business models, the other two that still exist. And the reason I say that is most multinational corporations see the unserved segment as the growth market of the future anyway. They're mature in Germany. They're mature. They're actually the growth markets of the underserved people. So the more a cultural minister can serve the underserved, the better. But it's not a government who would invest in this kind of thing. I think people might be actually leery if a government had a search engine. They go, what is that? That doesn't make sense. No, it should be an enterprise who has a vested interest in making it sustainable, profitable in the long run. And we're going to allow the local company to kind of tell us what they think the optimal strategy would be, and we'll help them out. So it's more decentralized decision making. One last question. Yes, sir. Yeah.
So how do you make it profitable? So say you would have a search engine that we're going to build.
Yeah.
So how do you make that search engine profitable?
Okay. How do you, first of all, there's not a search engine you would build. We would pre-build it for you, and you would improve upon it. That saved you a lot of money right there. Okay. Second, you would have advertising for, let's say, B2C, for example, like Google. It's a proven model, by the way. The contribution margins on advertising on the internet are crazy. It doesn't take that much. Alex, for example, if you're interested, can actually show you a lot of information on business model with spreadsheets and all that kind of stuff. So there is an in-depth analysis to make sure a local company, we call them local cos, has things to work from to make those business judgments. Some of the people that we're interacting with, they're already mega brands in their category. And they happen to be tied to countries. When you say the brand, they go, that's a country. That's, you know, like how Sweden has a couple of big brand names, right? But Norway doesn't, except Statoil, right? So each country will have its own business model that has to be co-created with us, just to make sure. When I pledged to the Gates Foundation to spend their money and make something sustainable, I had to think about making sure there were business models possible, otherwise it wouldn't be feasible. So
individual investors are out, only.
No.
So what kind of figure are we talking about?
Well, for example, a small country, I think the smallest was $50,000 to get started, but that's like a small island. And I don't think there will be a natural owner in such things. In a larger countries, it's $50 million because the server blades required for traffic are much high. A country like Hungary, $1 million. It varies by the size of the footprint of the country and the language clicks. It's just a pure function of that tower, how much that thing costs, and labor and things like that. So it's very scale. It's like opening up a restaurant or shooting an independent movie. You know, you shoot an independent movie, it's roughly the same cost kind of thing. Yeah, roughly. Yeah. I think the cost is in intellectual thinking it through and really being good about it. You know, that's the real cost. It's like, yes, last question.
Well, thanks. It was impressive. But maybe a question, where do you see this generative AI in 10 years? In 10 years,
okay. All right, where do I see generative AI in 10 years? Okay, because I'm old, I'll let you know. My experience. I was the last generation that did punch cards on an IBM 360 mainframe computer. Punch cards, right? And there was a thing called a compiler that reads the cards. Next day, you'd find out the errors. Darn it, and you'd redo it again, okay? When my generation did what was called regression analysis, fitting a line to a curve, right? We had to literally program every function and every part by line, right? Then a company called SAS, or SPSS. These are softwares that were developed in the early 80s. That basically you could write one line, proc reg, you put your model in, hit a button, bam, you got it. Then a company called Microsoft put something in Excel called the scatter diagram. Anyone ever done a scatter diagram with the dots? Then you say fit a line, then you say add r squared, and all of a sudden you got an r squared. The evolution was, it was very expensive to do regression analysis, very expensive, hugely expensive. Then as time went on, a little bit cheaper, and a little bit cheaper, and all of a sudden now it's open source. So that takes about 35 years, right? In the world of large language models and generative technology, it started in 1990 with John Little, and you had to be a very specialist. Then came people like me that did this crazy generative stuff, and it was bottlenecked within my lab and a few other people doing this stuff. Narrative Sciences was a company in America that did this. And then came ChatGPT, right? 2.0, right, the first one, and then 3.5. And then something happened. Companies like Meta, if you've heard of, companies like Meta and others decided to do a strategy. And the UAE government decided to implement a strategy. If you make tennis rackets, what do you want the price of a tennis ball to be? High or low? If you're a tennis racket manufacturer. Okay. So Meta released their Llama 2, their large language model, and put them for public use. It's called commoditization strategy. Commoditize your complement, make your complement cheap. They've basically released it and made it cheap. Llama 2, anyone can adopt it. And then came Falcon and Falcon 2. That's from the UAE government. 180 billion node neural network pre-trained. They simply released it. You can download it. So where do I think it's going? Cheaper and cheaper and cheaper, and more interesting. But the major wow has happened. There's going to be diminishing returns to the wow. Like, wow, that's amazing. It's going to get a little bit better incrementally for the next 10 years. But it's really the strategy that's interesting, is that people are going to make it very accessible and inexpensive. So if I were anyone out there, I would never say, buy 4,000 graphics cards and start training an LLM. Why? It'll take you a year to train, and within a year, there'll be other LLMs that someone's going to give for free. So it's going to be a commoditized business. There's this diagram, and I'll wrap this up here. I forgot. See this diagram here? Everyone? This thing, if you want to pull it out. And I'll take one more. Benny, can I do it? OK, thank you. This flow chart here at the back, I'm going to do this big, ugly flow chart. You want on the back here? OK, this is the way people in AI looked at the world in the how to say it? 70s, 80s, 90s, right? This is the way they looked at it. This is the way this was called back then, not AI. They called it multivariate statistics, by the way. Okay? This is what it was. And when someone would approach me and say, hey, Phil, can you create an artificial weatherman? Like when Gates said, can you do this? Can you create billions of little weathermen all over the world in all these languages? Can you do it? I said immediately, of course I can do it. It's trivial. Why? Why was I so confident? It's because I'm a frickin' expert. Why am I an expert? Because I know this diagram exists. Do you guys know this diagram exists? Yes, I just showed it to you. Congratulations, you are an expert. Nobody knows all the algorithms. Nobody. I'm sorry, there's some smart people, but nobody knows all this stuff. All right, so let's go through it. Right in the top, this triangle up here. How many variables do you have? See where my finger is? How many variables do you have? Many or just more than one, right? Well, let's think weather. Time, temperature, that's more than one, but not too many. Go down that branch. Are variables dependent on others? Is your latitude from the equator going to affect your temperature? What do you think? Probably. All right, let's go down that. Yes. Are they auto-dependent, correlated with each other? Is one village's weather similar to another village's weather? Yeah. So you go down that branch. Is weather location dependent? Where you were located? Sure. Do you want to describe, classify, compare, predict, or explain weather? What did Gates Foundation ask me to do? Predict. OK, go down the box. What are we going to use? Smoothing, interpolation, trend surfacing, geostatistics, variogramming, and Kriging. How many of you have, raise your hand, Who's never heard of kriging here before? Raise your hand. Yeah, me neither. So what do the pros do? I'm giving pro tip. This is MBA action here. What do the pros do? Step one, you go to YouTube. And which one do you watch? The shortest one. And then you watch the next shortest one, and the next, and the next. And you do that for about a couple hours, and you have some coffee. And then where do you go? You go to a place called GitHub, and you see if there's any code out there. How long do you spend there? 5 minutes. You just want to know if there's code. Then where do you go? Something called Stack Exchange or Stack Overflow. And you look if people are talking about it, and they'll put their names there. Who are those people? Future employees or freelancers. And then you have lunch. And then you come back. And then you do some searching. You do some searching, and you kind of look around to see who's applied this technique. What are you looking for? You're looking for brand names like Coca-Cola. You're looking for brand names like AT&T. Oh, there's some big companies who've used this thing. And you do some searching, and then you're done for the day. And then the next day, you talk to developers about whether they can do this or not. That's what pros do. This side, the other side, is modernized for the year 2020, all right? It's a lot more algorithms, right? ChatGPT, by the way, is just one line in this box down at the bottom here. If you can see where my finger is, way down here, there's a little ChatGPT thing, right? So this whole space is all of AI algorithms. This is everything, right? The yellow part, color-coded, is your objective. What do you want to achieve? Start there. Always start with the objective. The pink part is data cleaning. Clean your data. That's 80% of the cost of all AI, by the way, is data cleaning. The blue part is just modeling, understanding what causes what, reading the literature, brainstorming, talking to linguists, talking to experts, like we did with plants. The yellow part is called supervised machine learning. How many of you have gone to an Excel spreadsheet, did a scatter diagram, and fit the line to the scatter diagram? Who's done that? Okay, that's called supervised machine learning. Update your resume, okay? That's all it is. It's curve fitting to data, okay? And then the green part is optimization. Once you know what you believe the future is going to be, how much stock should you buy or sell? That's allocation. And there's a bunch of models there. Okay, so this is 2020. It's obsolete. On top of this is something called auto ML, auto machine learning. Why not have an algorithm do all of the algorithms simultaneously? So I don't need to have computer programmers. That's obsolete. On top of that is called adaptive auto ML, which is what? As new data is coming in real time, you simply adapt all the algorithms as in real time. And this thing is updated simultaneously. And that's where people are working on right now, is how to do this in real time for adaptive modeling, et cetera. But it's all basically statistics. Turning an image into data, turning text into data, turning music into data, and then from data going back to music or going back to images, et cetera. It's just some fancy statistic stuff. So when someone say, what's your methodology at the lab? I give them this, and then they don't ask questions. This is a quick trick. Thank you very much, everyone. Let's have our break.